Hello and welcome back to Impact Factor. I am your host, Katie Van Aken, and today I've got a non-interview episode, and the topic of discussion, of which I will be discussing with myself, is imposter syndrome. And it's something that is very prevalent in PhD programs, and I hope to talk a little bit about what it is, what triggers it, and maybe give you some tips for mitigating it and coping with it. So let's jump in, and I hope you enjoy. All right, so first is first. We're talking about imposter syndrome today, and as I was doing some research for this episode, I discovered that it has two other names, and one I had never heard of. One of them is imposter phenomenon, or IP as it is abbreviated. And the other is imposterism, which felt like a made-up word to me, but I was convinced after doing some reading on the topic. So there you go. So we have imposter syndrome, imposter phenomenon, and imposterism. And just to start us off, what is imposter syndrome? Well, so the definition is, having feelings of inadequacy that persist despite evident success. So feelings of self-doubt, intellectual fraudulence, and these feelings are often felt by high-achieving, highly successful people. And so, you can imagine why a PhD program, grad students in general, very driven, very successful, high-achieving people are feeling the effects of imposter syndrome as they go. And some of the other research that I read suggested that a lot of times this can be triggered by a new work environment, or in the grad school case, a new academic environment where you're surrounded by others who are also high achieving and highly successful, but you have your own goals, your own project. You have pressure from yourself, from your advisor, from your peers, whether, likely unintentionally. And you're surrounded by others who are working on similar yet different things. And you all have different academic backgrounds and experiences. So it's honestly no wonder that grad school and PhD programs lead to those feelings of self-doubt and the fact that you might be, quote, faking it. I first experienced imposter syndrome when I was in undergrad. So I came from a large public high school where, I was doing well academically, and, everyone expected that of me, maybe, but I also was the oldest of 4 kids, and so I felt, like I was the high achieving one, and I'm sure that all played into it, but I, crushed it in high school academically, and then ended up at a small liberal arts college where I was determined to major in physics. And it's funny because I, for some reason, convinced myself that I was fooling everyone, that I was this, because I also played soccer in college, and I looked around and there were no other team sport athletes, in my major, and I was like, man, I don't belong here, and maybe I'm kidding myself that I can't major in physics, and none of that was really, looking back on it, none of that was really grounded on anything, right? Like, I didn't actually know what grades my peers were getting. I didn't know how easy the homework was for them. It's all just like the appearance, right? It's the appearance of making it easy or making it seem like I understand everything, or they understood everything. And someone once told me, I don't remember where or when, but they told me that imposter syndrome is interesting because if you can really take a step back and look at it, you have convinced yourself that you are a fraud, right? You've convinced yourself that you don't belong in a certain environment, certain situation, because you're not as qualified, but you've also convinced yourself that you have fooled all of these other smart people into thinking that you are qualified and you do belong. So the sort of like irony there is that you feel internally like you're not smart enough, yet you've convinced yourself that you are smart enough to fool all these people into thinking that you are. Anyway, once I heard that and I started to think about that, one, it sort of blew my mind a little bit. But two, it gave me a different perspective of imposter syndrome and made me take a step back and look at it as almost like a third party looking at how my brain was working and how it was like fooling myself. And then, of course, moving on to grad school, you always feel I haven't met a grad student who didn't feel some sense of imposter syndrome throughout their program. And specifically, there are 5. Well, I'm going to give you 5 examples of ways that it sort of manifests. 5 things that sort of make it trigger, especially in a PhD program. So one of these experiences is public recognition or success, right? So, for example, let's say you are nominated for some award by your department, but when you look around, you are harder on yourself than others, and therefore you don't feel like you are the best option for this award, and so you start to feel like you don't deserve it, and that's common. I think it's, as soon as your success is no longer your own, but it's like advertised to other people, that can really trigger you to feel like you don't deserve the success. And who are these people to say that, I have the best poster, when really I know that it was really hard to make this poster for me, So that's one thing. The second thing is just generally comparing yourself with others. And this can often happen early on in a PhD program when you're taking classes because, like I said earlier, there's this sense of all these people coming together who have different educational experiences and different undergraduate, and even maybe they worked for a few years and now they're put into a class, and you can't help but compare yourself to each other. And so there might be some classes that are really easy for some people because they took that class in undergrad, and you may feel like this is the hardest class you've ever taken, and so you may feel like you don't belong. And of course, it's easy to compare yourself. It's easy to feel inadequate when you do. And then you start to convince yourself that you don't deserve to be there and you are not cut out for it, right? So in that case, the trigger there is just the general concept of comparing yourself. And we'll get to this later, but avoiding that kind of thinking can be really beneficial because it'll keep you from kind of falling into that trap of feeling inadequate. The third common trigger would be developing skills. So, for example, new skills that you have to develop as a grad student can make you feel like an imposter because by default, it's a new skill for you, and therefore people around you may already know it and may be better at it or may pick it up a lot faster. But here's one example of where you have to kind of give yourself permission to not be the best at something that you just learned. And your PhD program is that it's a whole collection of those things, and you're supposed to learn new things, and that's the whole point. And so when asked to learn new skills as part of your program, you have to give yourself some love and say, like, man, this is really new. It's going to take me a while to figure out, but that's okay. and it's okay. Another example, I guess similar example or trigger, is applying new knowledge. So this is an example of something that also might come up in your classwork, right? Where you are trying to do something new or learn something new, and then you almost feel like you're right at the edge of not being able to handle a new class or a new skill. And if you can't handle it, then that's game over, right? And so you start to put all this pressure on yourself. And this new knowledge, or like before, the new skills, they don't feel, you don't feel like you've mastered them well enough to belong. And similar to before, it's okay to give yourself permission to not fully understand something or not fully know how to do something well. That is the point of school in general, but especially grad school. And finally, the fifth trigger is asking for help. And this is kind of an interesting one because I think imposter syndrome often causes us to not ask for help, but then the situations that we land in where the only way forward is to ask for help can also cause imposter syndrome. So, for example, you are a new graduate student and someone explained something to you, but it didn't really sink in. And so a week later, when you have to use that instrument again, you basically can't move forward until you ask them to show you again. You immediately feel, I can't believe I have to ask them for help again, right? And so then you say, well, like, man, I couldn't even remember how to do this. Like, I bet you everybody else picked it up so fast. And here we go into the downward spiral, right? And so, some of that is warranted. I mean, as a grad student, you are often independent. You're good at solving problems and doing things on your own. And it can sometimes feel weird to ask for help and feel like you're giving in or feel like you're not capable of doing something without a little help. Hear me when I say I've never met a grad student who did their entire program and degree without a little bit of help from somebody else. In fact, I don't think I would have graduated without the help of probably 10 to 20 people. And that is the whole point of the acknowledgement slide. When you give your presentation, when you do your dissertation, you have a whole acknowledgement section in the beginning, and that's where you thank all the people for their help. So when you feel the need to ask for help, that's okay. You're supposed to do that, otherwise your acknowledgement section will be blank, and that will be weird. Okay, so just as a reminder, some of those triggers are public recognition, comparing yourself to others, sort of automatically, developing new skills or applying new knowledge, and asking for help. So now that we know some of the things that we do as graduate students that might cause this feeling, here's a couple of things you can do to mitigate it. And I mentioned some of these before, and a lot of times, so the first thing is to recognize the thoughts and feelings when they start to happen and notice what causes them. So if you know those 5 things, for example, are likely to make you feel these feelings, recognize that. And, when you need to ask for help and you start to feel down, talk to yourself and say, oh, it's okay. It's okay to ask for help. I can do that. Or recognize that you're going to feel some inadequate feelings when you get recognized for doing something good. Work on accepting that and recognizing your own success. And then it'll get easier the more times you're recognized, which will be many, of course. So, yes. So the first The first method is to recognize when it happens and why. Now, once we know that, we can do some other things. Another technique is to practice supportive self-speech. So I hinted at this before, but the things in your life that start to make you feel down, like asking for help or not understanding something right away or having trouble with a class, actively tell your brain and talk to yourself and say, it's okay. It's okay to not know. It's okay. In fact, it's normal. In fact, it's more normal for me to come into a graduate program not knowing how to do things than it is to come in and know how to do everything. And then, hopefully, that will help you get past that, and then you'll be able to succeed at whatever you're learning. A third technique is to talk to others about your imposter feelings. And this might be hard because I know when I was feeling it, I was like, well, I can't tell anyone about this because then I will be revealing myself, or I can't tell anyone about this because then they'll really think that I don't belong because I can't pretend and I can't even handle pretending, and so, but here's the key here, right? So in this case, like I said, most graduate students in particular are also feeling these feelings. So the more you talk with others, the more you understand how common it is to feel these things. A, you're going to be able to help each other. And B, you're going to be able to feel less strange, less abnormal about it, and understand that it's normal and that, you can learn to talk each other up or, motivate each other to get past these difficult, fraudulent feelings. Number four is my favorite because I think this technique is, I'm going to say, the most objective, but hear me out. So number 4 is reframing failure as a learning opportunity. And I also think this is a hard one because easier said than done, right? Oh, okay, I failed. Like, what am I supposed to feel happy about that? Well, think about this. People who succeed immediately on their first try actually learn a lot less about what they're studying or doing or trying, right? Because if I fail 10 times, I know a lot more about what does and does not work than someone who tried once and succeeded. Now, here's the other side of things, is if you are a grad student, you have committed your next 5 years to learning and studying and therefore failing. And so I know for a fact that you like to learn, because that's a big commitment to make if you don't like learning. And so it's this way that I've sort of convinced myself that I actually want to fail, and I desire to fail because failure leads to learning, and that is what I enjoy, right? So, next time you feel like you failed, try and reframe it and learn the lessons from your failure to move you into the next stage and the next time you attempt it. And keep in mind that every time you fail, you gather more knowledge. And the people who don't fail don't have that knowledge. And therefore you win. No, it's not a competition. Okay, that's number 4. Number 5 is be kind to yourself. This sort of goes along with the self-speech, but forgive yourself for making small mistakes. People make mistakes. You are human, and it's okay. And the most important person to forgive you is yourself. Not your advisor, not your parents. You have to be the first one to forgive yourself for making small mistakes. And on the other side, make sure you reward yourself for getting big things right. Let the little things go. Don't beat yourself up. And celebrate the big things and the things that you got right, because that creates balance. Number 6 is to seek help. And like I said, this is kind of where it becomes interesting because asking for help can create imposter syndrome, but one of the mitigation techniques is to seek help. And this is sort of two-pronged. So one area to seek help in is whatever you're struggling in, like specifically your work. So if you're having trouble with a specific experiment or you're having trouble with a unit in your class, ask for help, get help with something that you're struggling with. And everybody needs help at some point, like I said. And so this is a point when someone can help you and it'll make you feel less overwhelmed and hopefully help with those feelings. And secondly, along the lines of talk with people about your imposter feelings, you can also get help around those too. You can seek professional help, someone to talk to. They'll make you feel less, again, unusual. But it'll just be helpful to talk through things and kind of refocus yourself and learn some of these techniques for good self-speech and good self-support. And finally, visualize success. So this one, when I read this one, I was initially skeptical because I've never really been one who's able to visualize things. I remember when I was in college, we had our playoff game the next day in soccer, and one of the girls on the team had us lie down in the dark and visualize us winning the game. And I'm sure that helps for some people. I had no idea what I was doing, so I think I ended up just nodding off. But I'm not knocking it because I think in this context, where the common is to visualize success, is to kind of keep your eye on the big picture, right? The outcome of whatever you're doing, whether it's finishing an experiment or writing a paper or, getting a draft of your presentation done. Those things are concrete and there's an endpoint in sight, and keeping that visual and that kind of finish line in scope, in sight, will help you keep calm and focused as you get through some of the challenges along the way. So I was convinced that this is valuable. It's not necessarily visualizing yourself scoring a goal, but it is kind of keeping in mind what you have in front of you from a big picture goals type point of view. Okay, quick review. So the 7 mitigation techniques are: 1, recognize your thoughts and feelings when they happen and why. 2, practice supportive self-speech. 3, talk with people about your feelings. They have them too. 4, reframe your failure as a learning opportunity and love it. 5, be kind to yourself and forgive yourself. 6, seek help when you're struggling, both with your work and your imposter feelings. And 7, visualize success and keep that big picture in front of you. I'll help you get through it. Honestly, I think imposter syndrome I didn't really know what it was until I was in college. And I didn't know what it was until someone told me that the words I was saying, the sentiment of, I don't think I belong here, I'm not sure I can do it, everyone's smarter than me. At that point when someone said, you're having imposter syndrome, and that's sort of when I started looking into it. And it's one of those things that, there's no medication, there's no quick fix, there's no song you can listen to break the pattern. Although if there is, someone hit me up. But it kind of just takes some work. It takes work on your side to learn how to recognize it and learn to get past it. And, it's funny because you can get in this frame of mind where no matter how many people tell you how brilliant you are, how successful you are, how much you're the best in all the land, it doesn't sink in. And people who haven't experienced it don't really understand how that's possible. But the self-doubt and the fraudulent feelings, those are really strong. And our brains are really, really complicated and really scarily strong muscles. And therefore, you have to retrain it. So I hope these tips are helpful. I just want to, highlight those two things that I said before that I really liked. One is that advice that someone gave me, that someone going through imposter syndrome has A, convinced themselves that they don't belong and are not smart enough, but also B, convinced themselves that they're so smart that they fooled everybody around them. So it's a conundrum. What's the word? Paradox. It's a paradox. And then I was like, wow, this is a weird brain thing. I can handle it. And 2, as a grad student, you love learning. And so don't let failures become just failures. Let them be learning experiences and opportunities. And remember that every time you fail, you learn more than you did if you succeeded, because you'll eventually succeed, but you learn more along the way. All right. So that wraps it up for this week. Thank you guys for listening. And if you know anyone who wants to be interviewed, I'm still looking for some non-STEM PhD students to come on the show. So reach out via Instagram and or follow us for updates at Impact Factor Pod. And again, thank you all so much for listening, and I hope you have a great week.